Well, over the weekend, the New South Wales Families and Communities Minister, Kate Washington, indicated she's taking a long, hard look at the arrangement whereby non-government organisations are contracted to take care of children in the foster care system. Now, some kids in foster care get looked after directly by the Department of Communities and Justice, but others have their cases handled by a range of NGOs, non-government organisations. Now, over the weekend, the minister was quoted as saying that she was considering the option of bringing back the control of the care of at-risk children from the various private providers operating in New South Wales. Are you a foster carer? What's your experience of dealing with the privatised part of the out-of-home care system for children in New South Wales? Love to hear your stories on this. 1300 222 702. Minister Washington's comments have been welcomed by the Public Service Association. It says issues including cost blowouts, children living in motel rooms, being looked after by labour hire workers have pushed the whole system to the brink. Stewart Little's the General Secretary of the Public Service Association. Morning, Stewart.
Good morning, Suzanne.
Now, Stewart, we read over the weekend about children being looked after in motel rooms with labour hire workers because they had nowhere else to go. Can you break down for us how this actually happens?
Yeah, sure. Look, and I think it can only be described as a catastrophic failure by government, and obviously it's something which we're very keen for the new government to address as a matter of urgency. The history of this is that really back in, I think it was around 2009-10, the former Labor government outsourced out-of-home care out of what was then DOCs and pushed it out to NGO providers, as you correctly said. The real problem here is that a lot of these large NGOs, and I sort of won't name them or go through them, but they often use what's called a subcontract model, and then you end up with this ridiculous situation where you've got babies basically being looked after by labour hire people, someone, young person out of labour hire, no proper checks, but who's working the children check. And then you've got these children living in motels. Now, there's upwards of around 500 of those. They're called alternate care arrangements. So they're basically kids that can't find foster carers because obviously under the current arrangements, they don't have to take kids if they're high needs and so forth. So, you've had these huge blowouts. I mean, some of these alternate care arrangements are costing upwards of $2-3 million a placement. So not surprisingly, the costs have blown out. And it means that, really we don't have money elsewhere, and we've got huge problems with child protection workers, case officers. We're running at anywhere from 10 to 20% in terms of vacancies. And look, I could go on about that for a long time, but it's an area that really is in crisis. And I would say it has been a catastrophic failure of government over a number of years.
So why are these very at-risk children? Because you're saying these are the ones that some of these NGOs aren't contractually obliged to take. Why aren't the ones who are, I guess, the most high risk and I guess who would be less desirable to other foster carers to take, perhaps because of particular high needs? Why are those kids ending up in this private sector rather than the department itself looking after them?
Well, that's a great question, and one that, I think that needs answering at the highest level. But the obvious answer is that there's no contractual obligation for them to take them. Unfortunately, there's various contractual arrangements in place by the former government. Now it's up to the new government to unpick that. But you correctly say that they then outsource this and then basically subcontract. It's just appalling. I mean, can you imagine this happening within law enforcement or anything like that, where you just said, well, we'll bring in a contractor, look, here's a working with children form, fill that in, off you go, we've booked you into a hotel. That's what's happening, and it's happening, times 480 of these kids are outside the system. But, you've got, I think it's around 15,000 kids in foster care across the state. And obviously, these are vulnerable children, but as you rightly say, it's many of the most vulnerable that are simply falling through that safety net.
Now, I understand, as you said, there's these contractual deals that mean an NGO doesn't have to take a child and put on their books if they don't particularly want them. And yet the minister's saying some of these organisations actually have vacancies. So there are places these children could go.
Yep. That's right, and we liken it to the old sign that you used to see at the cinema where they'd put up the all care, no responsibility. And that's the problem. They think, well, no, we won't take them. We'll have to spend a lot of resources to look after these children. So basically, they're no thanks. We don't want them. We'll just look after the easier, kids. So that's what's happening. It's happening right across the sector. So. And look, it's nothing new. This has been happening for a number of years, unfortunately, and it's really up to the new government now, to grasp the nettle, make a decision and deal with it. It's a scandal. These are kids, at-risk children. They're not responsible for their predicament. And as a state, we need to take responsibility and really pick up the pieces and take responsibility for these kids.
Stewart Little is here, the General Secretary of the Public Service Association. I wonder if you've been involved in any of this, if you maybe been a foster carer in the non-government organisation part of this. What's your experience has been? 1300 222 702. The SMS is 0467 922 702. Now, one of the other things I read over the weekend, Stewart, you can tell me is this is true, that even if an NGO is saying, actually, we're not taking this particular child, they're actually still getting paid. The organisations are.
Absolutely. That's the nature of these arrangements. And unfortunately, this model, it's really been picked up in aged care, in disability care and in out-of-home care. It's, in our view, quite insidious. Particularly in areas where, like for example, in disability services, the O'Farrell government basically privatised the entire disability. We're the only state that has absolutely no involvement in disability services. Likewise, they sought to do this they did do this back in 2010 with this out-of-home care. That's right. The nature of it is that the NGOs sort of come in, do a contract, they can have capacity, but they choose not to for certain individuals. So, without going into too much detail, if there's a high needs or a child or something like that, then they'll just say no.
The minister is trying to attract more foster carers to the system. It doesn't sound terribly attractive the way you've outlined it, Stewart. What actually needs to happen to make that be a more desirable thing to do?
Firstly, the government need to bring back out-of-home care. They need to do it as a matter of urgency. I've had discussions with the Treasurer about this soon after, the new government came into power. It is something that should be a priority of this government because, as I said, there is, at the moment, it's a catastrophic failure of government. And particularly when you've got, upwards of 500 kids living in hotels and motels, it's just outrageous that can go on. They need to bring that back in. It should be run by the government. This is a critical, child protection should be a basic public service. So it's something that we have to take responsibility for. They need to bring that back within the department. We need to build up the capacity. There also needs to be a huge investment when we look at case officers, child protection workers. You got, people coming in from universities, a bit like the teachers. Now, their starting salaries are of $70,000. You're not going to attract people into that space. What's happening now, Suzanne, is that they're coming in, doing a year or so in the department, and they're going to work for these NGOs who are not taking proper responsibility. So, it's a failure of government. We need government to really now, okay, I understand when you first get elected, we're always going to point the finger at the former government, and correctly so. We've got problems right across the public sector. This has to take priority. They have to act. They've got to stop talking about it. They need to take responsibility.
Stewart Little, thanks very much for your time this morning.
Thanks, Suzanne.
Stewart Little, General Secretary of the New South Wales Public Service Association.